Welcome to the Understand Culture and Diversity lecture. I apologize in advance if you can hear Sesame Street playing in the background, but a mama has got to do what a mama's got to do, and the baby wanted to watch Sesame Street, and I need to record this lecture tonight, so here it is. So I apologize if you can hear it. So we're going to begin real quick with culture, and I know this is something that you've heard before. So culture, looking at it, is it can be talking about a religion, it can be talking about a nationality, or even a race, but it influences how we as individuals relate to the rest of the world. So this could be through different symbols or values that we hold, and it's usually passed down through generations. So kind of talking about different cultures, there's a different culture between maybe a gay culture or a straight culture. There's definitely a different culture from Idaho or from Alabama. I've lived in both states, and there's definitely a different culture. Think about Portland. Portland has its own culture. Or even Seattle. African Americans have their own culture. Different people from different countries may have their own culture. Even religion, so Catholic or Mormon or Muslim, they all have different cultures. So culture is important because it influences our values, our hopes, our humor, our fears, our worries, our loyalties, our views. So it's really something that we may not be aware of it, but it influences every bit about who we are. So when you're looking about, influencing our humor, our fears, I mean, what we find humorous in America is really lost with others from a different country sometimes, because they're like, I don't understand your humor. Take the British, for instance. Hilarious. They have their own sense of humor, which I find is hilarious, but that's a different culture that has, it influences what they find funny. So there's a material culture, so this is stuff that you can actually see. It might be referring to jewelry or different architectural elements. So we can see here some Hindu jewelry, Russian architecture. And there's also non-material culture. So these are things that, whether it's the language or beliefs or values, that a culture holds values. And that could be a certain religion. And we talked a little bit last week about multiculturalism, and to bring that back up again, multiculturalism describes the existence, acceptance, or promotion of multiple cultural traditions within a single jurisdiction, usually considered in terms of the culture associated with an ethnic group. American culture reflects a mosaic of all the many cultures that make up the United States. So going back to that very first slide that I had, which it's not going to get there real quick, but I mean, think about the United States. We have the South, we have African Americans, we have Mormons, we have Muslims, we have, everything in between, gay, straight, all these different cultures are blending together. We're cohabitating generally peacefully in a multicultural existence. So how does this differ from diversity? So we need to take a closer look to what diversity is. And diversity is more of the individual traits. It's looking at that every individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. So there's the primary dimensions of what makes us who we are, and that's, gender, male or female, or some cultures have a third option. A lot of the Native American cultures, they didn't put you in a male or female category. Sexual orientation, age, race, those things. There's a secondary dimension, and these are more influenced through culture, where you live, your socioeconomic status, your education, beliefs, religion. And so all of these things are combining to make who you are. There's also an organizational dimension. So depending on where you are in a company, if you work, even thinking about in the terms of a classroom, are you the teacher or are you the student? Or if you're at work, are you the supervisor or mentor, or are you the one that's, the last person hired, so you're the newbie on the floor or whatever. And the cultural dimensions, like we've talked about before, will influence beyond that, but this is, how much emphasis you put on time. Are you 5 minutes, do you arrive to parties 5 minutes before, or is that too late? Are you more competitive? Are you more cooperative? Do you work more of an individual or a team? So these all influence us as individuals. So looking at the difference between diversity and multiculturalism, diversity is the makeup of a group of people who have different characteristics. These characteristics can differ in socioeconomic backgrounds, countries, races, religions, and achievement levels. In public schools, we can see these things work and grow together. Multiculturalism is the difference between cultures. It is meant to preserve culture's identity within a larger society. Multiculturalism is finding the connection, acceptance between and among different cultures. So that's a little bit of a difference. Here's a visual for you of what makes you as a person, your identity. You have the primary, the age, race, sexual orientation. The secondary, what religion you are, socioeconomic status. The organization is third, and then finally the culture. So all of these influence you to make who you are. When you're looking at other people, you're working with other people, what you can see is at the tip of the iceberg. So look at the very top that's above, showing above the water. That's what we can pick up with people when we talk to them. Their race, their sex, do they have an accent? Are they wearing certain material, cultural identifiers? What we don't see below the surface is maybe their values, what religion they are. Sometimes that's not always apparent. Sometimes sexual orientation is not apparent. So who we are and what we see of others is just a very tip of that, if that makes sense. And the iceberg's a really good representation of that. Diversity competence and becoming aware of diversity and cultures, this will certainly help your competency, but this is something that takes time when you're in situations, and I've certainly had my fair share of them, when you're in situations with different cultures or different types of people, that you're able to maneuver, if something, even faux pas, like I've certainly made some errors in my beliefs, and they were learning moments for myself. So being aware that there are differences, being able to accept those differences, but also realize that that person standing in front of you is an individual. So you might have stereotypes of a certain culture, but you also need to keep in mind that each person is unique. And so that takes some diversity competence. One of the first things that is recommended when you start going through diversity or cultural training is you need to understand who yourself, who are you? And we each have our own map. And so at the center of this map is me. So what makes up who Erica is I'm the firstborn daughter of two. My upbringing, I grew up in, it was Meridian, Idaho. It once was on the outskirts of Boise. So it was kind of rural at the time, but not rural in the sense that, Emmett or Payette might be considered. Homogeneous setting. I tell my students, I grew up in a very white state, and I remember black children, but it wasn't until high school, and there was maybe a half a dozen, if that. It wasn't until my ex-husband and I moved to Texas that I really got the opportunity, to Alabama, that I really got the opportunity to be around people that really looked different than myself, and that was a good eye-opener for me. So that influenced, who I was up until that point of being, being from a place that didn't have a lot of diversity. The largest circle in that map is I'm an American, identify with both, I have Southern roots, so I get the collard greens and fixin' and y'all and sweet tea, but I also grew up in Idaho, so I have a Pacific Northwest culture. I wear tivas, I'm a bit of a tree hugger, I like to recycle, those kind of things. So examining what makes you is a good way of starting to relate to other people. So some things that you can do for yourself is think about, what is your religion? How has that influenced the way you behave? Maybe your marital status influence you. Maybe you're a widow or you're divorced. That certainly changed the way I saw the world. Definitely being able to live in different parts of the country has influenced the way I see things. Being a female has certainly, I definitely have a different outlook on things than a male does. I am a parent. I once was a student. And, I wasn't in the military, but I was married to someone who was in the military for over 10 years, and that certainly has given me some identity. I've always been in the working class, always worked very hard for what I have, and so nothing's been given to me on a silver platter or silver spoon. My dad was a police officer growing up. My mom didn't work outside the home, and so that's influenced me. So those are kind of things that you can start to kind of mentally go over, and what makes you as a person? What are those things that influence you, and how does that influence you? Social inclusion might be something that you hear when you're talking about diversity or culture. And social inclusion is a society that values all of its citizens and makes sure every basic needs are met. There are some European countries that are really the leaders in this, and that would be like Denmark or Sweden. When societies are exhibiting social inclusion, what kind of tendencies do they have? What kind of services are they doing? Those kind of things. Global citizenship might also be another terminology that you hear, and global citizenship deals with the global community. Everybody is humankind is essentially one. So there's not a difference between someone from America or someone from Africa. What makes us as who we are, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we're one humankind. And so you'll hear people talking about global citizenship. So with all of this, there are challenges, as you know, with culture and diversity. The first thing, they're called roadblocks is another way to look at it. I'll talk about an acronym called FIRE, which is fear, ignorance, resentment, and ego. So you hear in the news lately that, different cultures may evoke sense of fear, and that's an emotion, and that emotion is either real or it's perceived to be real by the fact that it's harmful or painful. And so that's really key here. It can be either real or perceived threat to make people fear. Ignorance, I don't want to get on that subject too much, but there's a lot of lack of diversity knowledge, and so that leads to ignorance. There might also be some resentment. I think you see this a lot lately when you're talking particularly about refugees. I think a common argument is we need to take care of our veterans first instead of refugees. Why are they getting housing versus veterans? And we'll learn, about logical fallacies, but that's not it's not an either or. We can't just anyway. So there might be some resentment there on that, and then egocentric, ethnocentrism, or ethno-relativism. So this is all about me. If someone's very egocentric, they're concerned about their well-being, so that's a barrier roadblock as well. BAPS is another acronym, and that stands for biases, assumption, prejudices, or stereotypes. So bias is, so you have a personal preference or a fixed opinion, so you prefer something or you're definitely against it, so you definitely have a bias one way or the other. Assumptions, so we might hear certain things either from people talking on the media, or we hear people talking maybe in class or our family, and we just make assumptions that X then Y equals Z or whatever. Prejudices, so that's, I think you all know what that is. And then stereotypes, making exaggerated generalizations about a class of people or individuals without giving regard to the individual differences that that people come to the table with. So some different definitions. Egocentrism is you are overvaluing your worth while devaluing others. So basically you care too much about yourself and not about other people. Homophobic, irrational fear or aversion to homosexuality or homosexuals. Xenophobia. I don't know if you've picked on this term, but it's been thrown around recently. But that is the fear or hatred of strangers or foreigners, or anything that is strange or foreign. That's a very relative, timely term to know right now. Ethnocentric, having or based on the idea that your own group or culture is better than or more important than others. I think you see that sometimes, America is, we're doing let's make America great. The only way that, we can function is by doing it our way. Well, we're relatively new to the scene of cultures of the way of doing things, and other countries and other civilizations have been around a millennial, and there might be something to be learned from that. So not being open to learning other ways of doing things could be ethnocentric. Ethno-relativism is a way to learn how to see that other cultures or other values may be beneficial. If you think about these things on a continuum, ethnocentric, you're very centered on you, yourself, or your culture, is on one end of the spectrum, whereas ethno-relative, you're able to relate to others, is on the other end of the spectrum. Bias, and we're going to go into more of this in the next lesson, but we touched on this already. It's a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. To clarify, it's not always bias against something. It can be bias for something. So when you're reading an article or watching the TV, you can kind of start to see if someone has a bias towards for or against it. So hopefully this has helped kind of solidify things on culture and diversity. I will make this Prezi available for you to peruse on your own instead of going back through the 20-minute lecture.